Welcome to the Providers Report, where we delve into the world of value-based healthcare. Our mission is to empower healthcare providers with the knowledge and tools they need to deliver exceptional patient care. Each episode, we explore best practices, innovative strategies, and real-world examples of how to achieve the highest standards in patient communication and outcomes. Join us as we transform the future of healthcare, one conversation at a time.
Today's episode is sponsored by The Smart Chiropractor and their new book, The Payday Practice. So I'm sure you guys have heard of Seth Godin, Gary Vaynerchuk, and Tim Ferriss. How do you think they would build a healthcare practice? The answer is in this book called The Payday Practice, a new book by Dr. Jeff Langmaid and Dr. Jason Deitch. This new book will show you exactly how to cover your monthly expenses in just one day every single month, guaranteed. Whether you want to just cover your monthly expenses for your physical practice or actually create the digital healthcare practice of the future, this book is your blueprint for building it, launching it, and growing it. Get your free copy today at www.thepaydaypractice.com. Their step-by-step guide to financial freedom will show you exactly how to 1. Set your dream, visions, and goals using their financial freedom formula. 2. Build a health tribe of people who are engaged and ready to go all in with your business. 3. Create an irresistible membership offer for your clients and patients. And 4. Launch and sell out your membership in the next 30 days. The Payday Practice will show you the exact step-by-step process that you can use to generate monthly recurring revenue in your practice. Get your free copy today, once again, at www.thepaydaypractice.com. That's www.thepaydaypractice.com. I would also recommend checking out The Smart Chiropractor on Facebook and also Instagram at The Smart Chiro for more amazing knowledge to take your practice to the next level. Please note that this episode does contain content related to both physical and sexual domestic violence and abuse. If you or someone you know is struggling with this, please visit thehotline.org for help. Today's episode with Mags is a crucial topic on healthcare reporting of domestic violence. She's a pharmacy technician with additional pediatric training and experience as a ministry and camp counselor. We encourage you guys to immediately add this extra knowledge to your database and be determined to be well-versed in domestic violence training. This will ensure the safety of both your pediatric and adult patients. Let's learn together. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Better Doctor Project. Tonight we have a really important discussion on the table, and to chat with us about this, we have Maggie, and she's going to be chatting with us about something so important, not only just professionally as a healthcare provider, but in our world today, in our world in the past. We're going to be discussing how to report and identify domestic assault victims, domestic abuse, all of these things that are so, so important. So to start off, Mags, thanks so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, before we get started, I would love to know a little bit more about you. Tell me what you're doing for work. Tell me about everything.
So currently I am in college. I am a ministry leadership major in college. I also work a full-time internship with my youth pastor. I've been a youth leader for the ministry there since I was 16. I'm 23, so been a few years. And then I also work full-time in a pharmacy setting as a pharmacy technician. So I'm not like directly working with patients like you would in a doctor's office, but I still do work with patients daily. Probably I see about 100, 150 patients a day. So
wow, that's a lot. And so what is your end goal? What are you hoping to do when you're done with college?
I hope to work in a like ministry setting in some way, shape, or form, whether that's like camp directing, youth directing, something like that. A friend of mine was a pharmacy technician at the pharmacy that I work at, and in the pandemic, she's like, "Hey, we're like really short staffed, and you're like super friendly and could do a good job." And I've been there ever since. It's been about a year and a half or so.
That's
So,
awesome. I've heard it's a really good career to be in, a good job in a lot of ways.
oh yeah.
And what really struck me as interesting when you and I were chatting before, obviously, this topic of domestic violence and domestic abuse in general, there's a lot of moving parts to it. And I feel like your background is really interesting, both with the ministry aspect as well as your interactions with patients, to where you were a perfect person for this topic. So I really appreciate you being willing to discuss that with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's super important. And it's not talked about enough. So,
Agreed. And that's exactly what Better Doctor Project is striving to do. We want to talk about the things that no one else is talking about, because when you look at the grand scheme of things, these things are so important. It doesn't make sense that they're not discussed. And I can honestly remember, I don't remember at what point in my training, but we obviously talk about this at some point. But pretty much the only thing that's discussed is you're a mandatory reporter as a healthcare provider. And then we just moved on.
yeah. That was kind of how it was strung on me, because as like a youth leader with Pennsylvania state laws, I'm not sure if that's like universal, but I'm a mandated reporter as well. So it kind of was something that I wasn't really prepared for or was knowing about a lot. So I had to do like my own personal research. And then through that, I've been able to kind of help other youth leaders and just kind of make it more of like not just like a bullet point that we hit, but something that we actually like hit and talk about. And
100%. That's awesome. Well, let's start with the basics. So in general, obviously, we know that this can be pretty common. Do you have any idea off the top of your head how common this is for adults, for children? What are we kind of looking at in the world of domestic violence right now?
I'm not entirely sure of the numbers for adults, but I know it is estimated that 1 in every 4 girls and 1 in every 7 boys will experience some form of domestic abuse in their lifetime.
Those numbers are insane. Yeah. And I did not know the one about males. That's really good to know too.
I think it's something that I honestly would think the number is higher, and a lot of them just go unreported, especially in terms of like males and stuff like that, just because I think it's something that they just are trained not to talk about.
Yeah,
so,
it's fairly new in the world of actually reporting that and having communication and discussion on that when it does involve a man or a boy.
Yeah.
Wow. So in your experience and in your training and all of your research with this, what, in a general sense, what does domestic abuse look like? And then when you're done describing that, how can it change, or what does it look like potentially as a patient in a healthcare setting?
So there are 4 main types of abuse that get talked about. So there is the like physical abuse, which would be what most people think of in terms of abuse. So like punching, hitting, causing physical harm. The other one that gets kind of talked about more would be like sexual abuse. So what that might look like would be touching inappropriately, using inappropriate language, stuff like that around a child from an adult or even another adult and stuff like that. The other ones, which don't get talked about as much, would be the verbal abuse. That would just be like kind of always yelling, saying that you're worthless, saying that you're kind of everything's your fault, something that's like kind of really messes with your mind, not necessarily leaving like a physical scar, but it leaves like an intense mental scar. And then the other one would be emotional abuse. So neglecting your emotional needs, whether that be being mad at you for being upset in an emotional way, or just kind of like a combination of any of the other kind of abuses kind of affects you emotionally rather than physically. So those would be like the 4 main types. And any of them can kind of be thought of as domestic abuse, just kind of depending on your standpoint. So in terms of like a healthcare setting, some things that you might want to look for is like patients not really understanding that they're like, how do I want to phrase this? If you're looking at like an adult patient, maybe if they have another adult in the room and they're not really like looking to them for like guidance for what's going on, or they're kind of more on like afraid and skittish kind of type thing. If you're looking at like a child, I would be a lot of what we notice is that they're kind of shying away from your like touch. Like say you need to examine them in some capacity. Sometimes they'll like flinch or tense up or something like that when it comes to another adult touching them in any way. So there's a lot of signs to look out for.
Those are definitely some good main ones. I mean, I actually never thought, I take care of a lot of kids, and I never thought about the fact that something as simple as just being uncomfortable during an exam could be a pretty good giveaway. I think the one that I think about the most is just, I do notice sometimes the difference between, you know, a parent versus child patient situation, but the difference involving something like abuse would be like actually hearing words in public that are completely inappropriate being directed toward your patient. Or one example that jumps to mind, I actually had a friend who was doing outpatient care at a hospital, and his patient was actually in his 70s or 80s, like an elderly man. And it took him a couple visits to realize something was really inappropriate. But once he did, he found out that that poor elderly man was not only physically being abused, but like mentally and emotionally as well. It was like the whole spectrum. And it ended up getting completely reported. This elderly man had to be put into someone else's care because his own family was doing this to him. And it's scary to think that it can literally be the mother of the child who is your patient. You know, it could literally be someone that they know so, so well.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times it kind of gets skewed in the eyes of the patient because it can be the people that are supposed to like take care of you or to love you or something like that. And you don't really understand that it's wrong, or you don't understand this is not something that everyone's experiencing because you don't know any better.
Yeah.
Or in terms of like the old man that you were telling us about, was that like he probably knew better, but he didn't know how to speak up because he's, you know, supposed to be the patriarch of the family, and that it's not something that should have been done, obviously, but he didn't know how to speak up about it or say that, oh, this isn't something that's supposed to be happening, but it's happening anyway.
Definitely. So when you do suspect this as a clinician, healthcare provider, what do you recommend as a course of action? Let's say at first you're kind of suspicious, and then finally something happens, or you see something where you're like, okay, this is definitely a problem, and the patient is immediately in front of you. What would be a good reaction? What can you do in that moment, or is it best to wait?
So, one thing that we talk about a lot is that you want to look out for the 3 hurts. So that would be that the patient has an intent to hurt themselves, has an intent to hurt someone else, or you suspect they're being hurt by someone else. So if you suspect any of those things, or they tell you, you can physically see it, or you just sense like the vibe is off in a way, that would definitely be something that's worth reporting. It's always thought of, at least where I'm from, it's better to report something and have it come up with nothing than to not report it and have something terrible happen.
Definitely. So then once you've decided that, is there anything you technically have to do in person in that moment? Or is that kind of case by case? Or is it just a matter of reporting after they leave?
I know from like personal experience, I've had to make a couple of reports myself. It's never been something that I've physically done with that person. So I know in my experience, we always like report it to, like, I would report it to my youth pastor, and then we'd both go online and make the report through Childline and do it that way. It's never been something that I've like discussed with the kid directly or anything like that. Especially if it's something that you're just like suspecting and you don't notice it directly. Because the last thing that you want to do is, especially if something's going on and you suspect it and you confront them about it, you can almost make the situation worse if you directly like brought it up, especially if they're being abused by a parent or a significant other that is in the room with them. If you bring it up in front of them, then it's going to be worse of a situation.
Yeah, that's a really good point, especially when it's just a suspicion. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. On the flip side, what happens? Let's say, for example, you have a pediatric patient. You, of course, know the parents. Maybe they were there at a different visit. But now that pediatric patient is confiding in you, they're maybe telling you directly, so and so has hurt me, or so and so has touched me inappropriately. And maybe it's not their parent. Maybe it's someone at school, a friend. But now you have that knowledge, right? And technically, all of our visits are supposed to be confidential, but obviously, this is completely different. So in that moment, they're telling you 100% so-and-so hurt me in this way. How can you help that person, whether they're a child or an adult? How does that vary?
At least in my experience, I would definitely involve someone who's more in charge than me. Obviously, if you're like the doctor in the situation, you might be the top of the line person there. But if it's something like they're coming in, but like parent or guardian that they're saying is hurting them is in the waiting room, like waiting for them to get done with their appointment, I would probably reach out to the authorities directly and just say, hey, I had a patient tell me this. Not really sure what to do here. Contact social services in some way. Just try and remove them from that situation if that's what they're saying is happening.
Right. I'm also trying to think like, I am sure this has happened. This hasn't happened to me, thank goodness, but I wonder what it would be like if a pediatric patient mentioned someone other than their parent. And then you have to kind of find that line because they obviously might not feel comfortable telling their parent that someone else has hurt them. But then how do you tell the parent? I mean, that's also a really sticky situation too.
Yeah. In those cases, I would probably talk to the like pediatric patient themselves and say, is it okay if this is a conversation that we have with mom, dad, grandma,
absolutely
within the room? And if not, then it would be a situation of, do we contact social services? Do we contact the police? Do we contact from there just to kind of gauge? And I think that would kind of be on a case by case basis.
Yeah, that's a good point. So social services obviously is a good go-to for a pediatric patient. And then law enforcement, would that kind of be helpful for both a pediatric patient or an adult patient technically?
I would say so, because they would know like the laws and stuff that are in place to kind of prosecute whoever is in causing the harm. So
I can imagine they could really easily decipher, okay, is this a first offense? Has this happened before? Is this family on my record already for something else? So that could probably be helpful as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any, obviously you have some experience with this, but do you have any examples of, a really negative situation involving something like this where your knowledge, it was able to help that person?
So in like a pharmacy setting, we had a case where a patient came in after getting their wisdom teeth removed at a dentist's office, and they were waiting in store for their medication. They got some for like painkillers and some antibiotics and stuff like that for after it. And they came in with their girlfriend. I'm not really sure what her relationship to the patient was, but he was getting very aggressive and very mean. We have like a couple of chairs set up next to the register just for people to sit and kind of wait for their medications. And they started fighting up and down the aisles of the store. And it just kind of became an awful situation. And my pharmacist didn't know what to do. And because I work in a retail setting, like the front end manager didn't know what to do. And I was like, well, the first thing that we need to do is, calm them. Well, first thing we need to do is contact the police, which we did, and kind of calm them down, make sure that it's not going to become a throwing fists, doing anything like that. And then also, luckily, the painkiller that he got was like a C2 medication. So it had to, like, by Pennsylvania law, it had to have like the address and everything like that on the prescription itself. So we were able to, they left the store before the police got there, which we couldn't like hold them, but we were able to give them like all of the information that we like had, which wasn't like a HIPAA violation or anything like that, because it wasn't like we were giving them health information. We were just kind of giving them patient information, which my pharmacist said wasn't like an issue, whether it was or not is not.
Yeah. Well, and when someone else is potentially being harmed, I can imagine that's a totally different situation.
Yeah. So
Wow. It's a good reminder too. I know, and this probably is an unpopular opinion, but it's important to note sometimes as healthcare providers, especially as a specialist or form of a physician, it's hard to remember like, yes, we're in an esteemed professional setting. And yes, there's a lot of responsibility that goes with that. But at the end of the day, there are professionals who are trained to deal with this. And that's a really good example in that moment where you kind of just have to give up the reins, do what you can in that moment and then let law enforcement, let whoever it is take over and do the thing that they're trained to do.
yeah. And I think that's why I always think of it kind of like a partnership, like every single person that is put in place to be in charge of that style of thing is there for the better interest of whoever the victim is in that case. So we all kind of work together, whether that's in a healthcare setting, if that's in a ministry setting, law enforcement, anything like that. We all just want like the best case scenario for whoever is being harmed in the situation. So we can all work together for their safety, which is super important.
Yeah, I love that you put it that way because our podcast is all about healthcare teams and how important it is to have people of varying strengths and weaknesses and responsibilities. And this is no different. You're absolutely right. So you said you kind of did your own research about this too. And for some of our listeners who feel like they're listening to this and they're like, oh no, I know nothing about this except that I am supposed to report. How can I dive in and do some more research of my own? Where would you recommend our listeners go? What's a good resource online? What books, what anything that's out there that can help us? Where would you recommend we go?
I would obviously it would kind of depend on like local and state laws and stuff like that. So I would recommend looking at your like state legislation. I found a lot of my information on the Pennsylvania Childline website. Just kind of search like your state's name and like mandated reporting into Google, and they can find most of the like resources and stuff like that that are needed. You can also like reach out directly to like a counseling office, social services, anything like that, if you want to understand your role in like how to better report, what else to look out for, kind of stuff like that. They have people that are trained and would love to be able to educate. So
absolutely. It's a good reminder too. We should probably know those people in our community. We should probably have a go-to phone number, an office, someone in those roles. And it shouldn't just be like, oh no, a crisis is happening right now. Who do I contact? So for everyone listening, this is definitely, thank goodness, not the norm. These situations are rare, but they do happen often to some extent. So it's important to know you might not notice this every day or every week, but when they happen, you want to be prepared. So to everyone listening, now is a great time to look into your community, meet with a counselor, meet with some of these offices, understand where to go for social services and all of that stuff so that when something is happening, you know exactly what to do. To wrap up, I would love to know, in your personal experience, maybe even as a patient, if you had a provider who knew what they were doing in this kind of situation, what kinds of characteristics or what kind of doctor would be encouraging for you, someone who is hearing you and seeing you as a patient through something like this?
As someone who has experienced this type of thing, like just like personally, not just from a like outside perspective as someone who's had to report the situations, just kind of having someone who genuinely cares, even if it's not for the reason that I made the appointment or that I'm in your office for that reason. I find a lot of times that they'll, my like small group kids, my youth kids will tell me these things, not because it's like, because I'm the only adult that'll listen to them. And a lot of times, like if you're in a situation where you're uncomfortable at home, the person who is like causing the abuse or whatever might be okay with you going to the doctor, but they might not be okay with you, going to a police station, going out to lunch with a friend, someone that'll go into a situation where you're not going to be able to report the like instance. So just kind of, even if it's not like the trajectory of where the appointment's supposed to be going, just kind of listening and just saying, oh, this is what's happening. This is why you're here. Just kind of maybe asking more questions about making sure that everything's going okay at home, just kind of being a listening ear versus like a straight through and through to the point. Oh, you're here because you're experiencing, headaches at home. This is, I prescribe ibuprofen, and then just sending you out the door. Like, it's
absolutely. And it can be as simple as, some of the situations where I've witnessed this, it can be as simple as, okay, you're here for headaches, blah, blah, blah. You go through the visit, you do everything you have to do. But then at some point you say, are you safe in your own home? How is your home stress life? What is your relationship like with your family? Like, really simple questions. And that alone can open up the door and make someone comfortable explaining anything to you, which should be our technical goal as healthcare providers anyway.
Yeah. And if you're looking at like terms of like a child or a teenager or anything like that, make sure you're also asking about like their relationships with other adults or other individuals within the home, not just like necessarily like mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, whoever they live with, but making sure like teachers are being okay, coaches are being okay, staff members, wherever, because while we think of it in terms of like, oh, it's just the parents or it's just the relatives, it can also be teachers, coaches, anyone.
Anybody. Yeah. And that is the reality. And that's why this topic is so important. And I really thank you for coming on to chat with us about this, because we need to know more. And the fact that in our training, it's kind of like, hey, you should probably report this, and then we get nothing else. That's a disservice to the potential people that we could be helping in our practice, because they're out there. There are people we don't even know who are, going through this right now. And there's no way for us to find out unless we try to get to know them on a deeper level. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate having you on Better Doctor Project tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to the Providers Report. We hope you found today's episode valuable and inspiring. To stay updated with our latest episodes, subscribe to our podcast wherever you like to listen. For more resources and continuing education opportunities, visit our website. Together, we can make a difference in the lives of our patients and truly set a standard for value-based healthcare.